Good afternoon, everyone. I will be presenting my Common Core lesson that I chose, and I'll be evaluating new generation learning standards as opposed to Common Core standards. Here before you is a copy of the lesson I chose. This is a 5-day lesson. It's an ELA lesson, and it is a lesson on themes. This lesson had 13 different Common Core standards in it. Here we see the teacher instruction, the big idea, and synopsis of what the novel is about. During the reading, the students will independently ask questions, which I think is a very good piece, sparks conversation. And there's multiple essential questions here. I want to kind of look at the vocabulary. It's a very important piece of this lesson. Over to the left, it shows you here words in which the teacher has to define, clearly spelled out in the lesson. Over here, it shows you that these are words that students should be able to figure out the meaning of the word. Important piece in lesson is the vocabulary. Here we have these two questions here, this one and the one above, I would make that my assessment questions. Here we have additional tasks. This lesson really supported all learners, ELA learners, as well as students with deficiencies and other multilingual students. It suggests that you play a song, watch a video, all things I would probably do. It also gives you different examples of graphic organizers. So I want to say that looking at this lesson plan, I would say it does align with NGLS standards. Sentence strips to support all learners, as I said earlier, as well as the graphic organizers. Multiple activities will happen from this lesson. I'm going to move on to the PowerPoint presentation. The name of the book, we're going to get right to it, is Black Cowboy, Wild Horses. It's a true story about a former slave who became a fierce cowboy in Texas. So what are we doing here? Again, we're looking at the Common Core and Next Generation Learning and evaluating the standards, the two different standards. What is the lesson about? The lesson teaches scholars about themes. That in themes, there's a lesson to be learned from a theme. Bob Lemon's an African-American and former slave who is extremely intuitive to his surroundings based on the incident in his life of a Texas cowboy. Lemons, his name is Lemon, Bob Lemons. Again, it's a true story. The tale centers on his success in corralling a herd of wild Mustangs with only the aid of his horse. The African-American cowboy uses his skills of reading the land and the horses to embed himself in a herd of wild Mustangs. Once there, he is able to lead the herd back to the corral and to the ranch. Notice the language in here. The language says he embed. That's one of the vocabulary words, embed. Students would have to figure out what the word means and how it relates to the wild Mustangs and what he's doing. It's actually a verb, what he's doing and why he's doing that. This lesson is for 5th grade mainstream ELL and other educational multilingual students. What will students learn? They're going to learn about the theme, and the theme and the takeaway from the lesson is that with patience and perseverance, you can achieve your goal. Here's another example. Cowboy Bob was anxious to see the Mustangs, but he was patient and did not rush after them. I have a quote here. Patience is not just simply ability to wait. It's how we behave while we're waiting. More visuals here for our learners. Patience is power. The learning theory I chose for this lesson, what it aligns with, is the behaviorism constructionism. Because in this theory, we've all heard the saying, he's a product of his environment. And that's why he behaves that way. Sometimes it's true, sometimes it's not. But it's safe to say that behaviorist theory study how a student might function or learn. It must be contingent on what is taught. So this lesson teaches about theme and how a student can learn a lesson from it, from what a theme is. And this one to be patience, and you could achieve your goals, as this cowboy did. This activity uses examples of intrinsic reward of a fierce cowboy to teach a lesson on patience and outcome of perseverance. A former slave is seen as a hero by being humble and fierce and determined. More on behaviorism. Piaget's constructionism, named after the Swiss cognitive psychologist. I want to go down to here. He speaks of there's different stages in constructionism, and here he says that he describes three mechanisms: assimilation, accommodation, and equilibrium. Here, assimilation, here we see examples of how a cowboy was able to assimilate himself amongst the Mustangs to gain their trust. And we also see here when learning, in order for learning to happen, student has to assimilate to what the learning is. According to his theory, what is learned is organized according to schemes. Schemas are mental representation of something tangible or intangible that can be applied to an object or situation. Here I want to take a look at the standards again. The Common Core standards align with this lesson. In this activity, it aligns because the standards, they're added to make the design meet the desired goal. By the end of the lesson, students will have practice using the standards and will get the big idea. The lesson gave multiple suggestions on which graphic organizers to use, as well as multiple intelligences activities. During the lesson, I liked at stopping during the read aloud so students could ask questions and so that the teacher can ask questions to lead into healthy discussions. This is a week-long lesson. I can see students engage in this lesson and possibly writing their own questions. So here is where I say it does align with the lesson Common Core standards, along with new generation learning standards. I'd like to talk about the comparison that I've noticed with the different lessons. So let's see if it's here. Here I have all the standards spelled out, as you can see them, 13 and more. And when I looked at the NGLS standards, I see the difference. And the difference I see is that with new generation standards, it's more descriptive, it's more language friendly, and more easier to comprehend than the Common Core. And I want to pull up where I actually capture it. Let's go back. And what I mean by it's more, it's easier to understand. What I mean by that is there's more opportunities for students to make the connection with what the standard is that wants them to do, wants the students to do. I'm going to talk a moment about what I would add to the lesson. Here in this slide, I'm showing you where The standard does align because for our RI 5.1, it says, RL 5.1, quote actually from the text and when explaining what the text says. Here we see the response given. Here the student is expected to quote right here, he needed to smell the sun or the moon and stars before the Mustangs could accept him. Okay, he had to become one of the Mustangs, so to speak. The student has to quote here. I like that the lesson also aligned with the vocabulary. When students know how to decode words, he can figure out what those words mean, what it is. And to make it better align with NGLS, what I would do is I would add an expository writing piece. Students would have to write an informative summary using a theme. They could choose a theme. Now that they understand more that a theme teaches a lesson, they could come up with their own theme, write it, and do a informational piece where they would have their peers to view it, to give them feedback about the piece. Once they get the feedback and the editing on their expository text, then they would meet one-on-one with the teacher to do a second reflection. And the third reflection would be them presenting the piece that they write. We find that, at least in my experience, that students are not presenting enough. We give them work to do, we do an assessment, but they never get to really hear themselves speak. They never get to catch their own errors, and they don't get to grow. They don't get to find out where they need to grow. I believe that when they present, it's a better opportunity to build on those skills. So I believe here, I want to say here, let me find this. I spoke to you about the Common Core standards, but I want to touch base on, has to be here. Let's see. We talked about what students will learn, what students, the students will learn patience and perseverance as a theme. But what I want to touch upon is the fact, rather the differences I found with the way how the NGLS writes as opposed to the Common Core. I could just explain it. The slide is here. I find that with the Common Core, the writing is it's kind of subjective. It doesn't explain it in depth. It doesn't explain it in depth. So I can do it this way. I can go to the actual standard and I can read from it that way. So let's do that quickly. I can give you my feedback that way. Standards, right here. Oh, let's take it from here. In the Common Core and Next Generation Learning. Let's take it from here. Okay. Here we go. Like I stated earlier, that I examined the 13 Common Core standards for this activity, as well as NGLS. I found the difference lies within the descriptive language used in the Next Generation Learning Standard, which I believe is easier for students to comprehend. For example, 5RI, locate and refer to the relevant details and evidence when explaining what the text says, explicitly, implicitly, and make a logical reference. Here's what Common Core says for the very same standard. quote accurately from a text when explaining what the text says explicitly and when drawing inferences. That's when earlier on I gave the